Okay, welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time. This is our second lesson of Masechet Nedarim, and today is going to be a shorter lesson because we are going to be reviewing Daf 8 through 12, which is today's Daf, and we will get an overview of this week's Daf. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing I'll stop sharing the slide now so we can see each other. Okay, let's go. All right, Daf 8. On Daf 8, the Gemara tells us that a person can take a vow to do a mitzvah, which is interesting. We're going to see that some say you cannot do this, meaning if I'm already obligated to do a mitzvah, how can I then take another vow to obligate myself more? That doesn't make sense. I'm already obligated. Wait, hold on a minute. I just see this. Let me turn this off. Okay, never mind. Okay, so the Gemara says that based on a verse in Tehillim, we are allowed to do it because David says he's taking a vow to do a mitzvah. So the Gemara again asks, wait a minute, aren't we already obligated to do a mitzvah? So the Gemara says, you're right. When you take a vow to do a mitzvah, it's not that I'm taking a vow to now obligate myself because I'm already obligated to do it. Rather, it is a way in which I can encourage myself to do it. I want to make sure that I do this mitzvah. Therefore, I take the vow. The Gemara continues with other vows. In a positive way, right? I'm going to learn, right? I'm going to learn this masechet. I'm going to learn this parsha, right? The Gemara says that's a very good vow. So again, the Gemara asks, wait a minute, aren't I already obligated to learn? Not women, but men. Right? Men are obligated to learn Torah. It's a mitzvah. How can they take a vow to obligate themselves again? So first the Gemara says, you're right? The minimum amount with that obligation to learn Torah, the minimum amount of Torah that you could learn is saying Shema at night and in the morning. That fulfills your obligation of learning Torah. However, if you want to learn more, so now I can take this vow and that will help me, to motivate me to learn more. Okay, if you remember last week, we discussed the concept of being excommunicated, right? Excommunicated means that you are placed in what's called nidui or shamta. There are different ways to understand it. And it basically is an excommunication. It's a way for the court to penalize you to do something that you need to do. So now the Gemara has a very interesting discussion. The Gemara asks, what happens if somebody has a dream and in their dream they were excommunicated? Do we see them as being excommunicated or not? And here, very interestingly, if you remember, we did have a discussion about dreams a while ago in Masechet Brachot. Actually, I think in Masechet Shabbat, we talked about dreams being a 60th of prophecy. I don't know if you remember that conversation, but on one hand, we don't take dreams seriously, right? We don't say, that's for sure going to happen. On the other hand, we do in the sense that they seem to be saying something, right? Now, again, as I've said previously, I think that the Gemara is very forward-thinking, right? The Gemara recognizes that dreams have personal involvement, right? If I'm thinking about something, I'm worried about something, I'll probably have a dream about it. On the other hand, the Gemara seems to say that there's something divine to our dreams as well. And we say, there's like a kernel of truth. I'm just not sure what the kernel is. So the Gemara says, if you have this dream that you were excommunicated, we're concerned that maybe God wanted to excommunicate you, and therefore he sent it to you in a dream. Therefore, what do you need to do? You have to gather 10 scholars. And we know that when 10 men come together, they bring down the divine presence, the Shekhinah, and these 10 people are going to remove the excommunication. And so the Gemara explains, just like God put him in, so God is going to take him out in the sense of being represented by 10 learned people. Excuse me. What if in your dream a specific person puts you in cherem, a specific person excommunicates you, right? Your neighbor, right? Somebody that you know. So now the Gemara says, can I call up that person and say, please release me because in my dream you put me in the dream, in excommunication? The Gemara says no. When you dreamt about it, so it's really God putting you into excommunication, but this person was the messenger. So the person can't take you out. God needs to take you out. How can God take you out? 10 people together. Again, here the Gemara says clearly on Daf 8, right? Dreams are partially true, meaning there's something that is truthful in your dreams. I'm just not sure which part. Right? And therefore, here's the next question, right? What if you had a dream that you were put into cherem, you were excommunicated, and then you were released in the dream, right? Do we say, oh, God put me in and God took me out? The Gemara says no, because I'm not sure which part of the dream was real, right? Again, we don't think that the whole dream is real, only parts of it. And therefore, maybe the part that was real was putting you in, but not the part that took you out. So again, you need 10 people to take you out of this excommunication. From here, we have a story about Ravina's wife who made a neder. She took a vow. And the question here was, Ravina asked, can he, the husband, be a messenger, a shaliach, for his wife in order to get released? Now, it's important to understand, if you remember, last week we discussed 2 ways to get out of a vow, right? One is that when the husband hears about it, he can revoke the vow. That's called lehafer. He can lehafer the neder. That is only, and I think I mentioned this last time, but I'll say it again this time, that is only if it involves him, and we'll see this later on in the Masechet. If the vow does not involve him in any way, he does not have the power to lehafer the neder. He doesn't have the power to revoke the neder. Rather, again, she can go by herself and go to a sage or to a court and ask them to annul the vow. That's hatara, lahatir et haneder, right? To annul the vow. She has the power to do that. Now, the Gemara says, right, can she send her husband in her stead, right? We know that a person can send a shaliach, can send somebody in their stead. Can the husband be that person, right? Is it, right, that she can appoint him as a shaliach, or is he too close, right? We talk about this concept of a husband being, in Hebrew, we say ishto kegufo, right? A man's wife is like himself, right? As close as to himself as you can, right? So what does that mean, right? Are they seen as the same person, therefore he cannot be her messenger, or not necessarily? So that was the question. The answer is that he could be her messenger, her shaliach, only if the court, those 3 people that they're going to, are already convened. If they're already convened, then he can go to them and he can annul the vow, or ask them to annul the vow for her. However, right, let's say she was excommunicated, then he can get someone to release her faster. He doesn't have to wait till there are already 3 people already assembled. From here, the Gemara goes on, since we were talking about excommunication, I think we mentioned this last week. If a person takes God's name in vain, that is grounds for excommunication. So you have to be very careful not to take God's name in vain. And we're going to see this when we talk more about the language of a vow. We're going to be very careful that you do not take God's name in vain. And we'll see how that works out in a minute. Here, the Gemara goes off a little bit on a tangent and talks about, right, if we're talking about people who take God's name in vain, there are the righteous people who do not, and there are evil people who do. And the Gemara explains how God judges both the righteous and the evil people in the next world. And we have learned this concept before. If you remember, we learned there's a verse in Tehillim, or Zarua Latzadik, Uli Yishrelev Simcha, right? God has this special light that will be for the righteous. And we are taught that when God created the world, in Genesis, which we read 2 weeks ago in Parshat Shavua, when God created the world, right, it says that Vayihi Or, he created this light. And the Gemara explains that the light was too powerful. It was too overwhelming. So what did God do? God took the light and he hid it away for the righteous people, for the world to come in the next world. And here the Gemara at the bottom of Daf 9 explains that in the next world, God is going to reveal this light, and it will be a healing light for the righteous people, or Zarua Letzadik, right? It will be positive, beautiful for the righteous, but the same light is going to burn the evil people, right? So the Gemara explains that we don't have this concept of, we have a concept of Gehenom, of hell, where people are punished for their sins, but afterwards in the next world, there's no like everlasting hell and wonderful heaven. There's this one reality, and that reality will be positive for the righteous people and challenging, to say the least, or burning or suffering for the evil people. Okay, Daf 9, we have a new Mishnah. Let's go back to vows. So the Mishnah explains that if, let's say, someone takes a vow and says, I will make a vow like the evil people make a vow. So the Gemara says that is valid. Again, it's not so good to take vows, though we're going to go back and forth on that opinion, right? We did see that when we started this class, we talked about it being good to take a vow for, let's say, right, doing mitzvot. But in general, it's not good to take vows. So if you say, I'm going to take a vow like the evil people do, that works for an oath, that works for a sacrifice, and it works for being a Nazir. I want to take a vow like the virtuous people do. So then that's invalid, because in general, virtuous people do not take vows. So again, it's maybe counterintuitive, but we are going to say that, again, if I take a vow, not in the regular sense, I swear to X, right? I vow to Y. Here, the Masechet is going to construct cases where it's not as clear, right? Where we're saying, I take this vow, but not in the regular sense of vow making, but I'm using different words. So the Mishnah is going to explain sometimes those words work and sometimes they don't. If you say like a nidava, right? So like their nidava. Now, if you remember, I mentioned last week 2 different vows, neder and nidava. They're both vows. But nidava is taking something upon yourself, and here kinid votam, like their nidava is like their offerings. If you're taking a vow like the offerings of the righteous, so then that works for, again, taking upon oneself to bring a korban or to become a nazir. So the Gemara explains at the top of Daf 9, there are basically three separate cases. One is like evil people, right? And you say, Hareini, right? I want to be again, I want to be a nazir. But like evil people, so then that's valid, right? If he sees an animal and then says, like evil people say, this animal is for me. Remember we said, alai, on me, meaning I'm taking upon myself the responsibility to bring it as a korban. So then that works. If I say, hemenu, right, like I want to distance myself from this object, like evil people do, you are then prohibited from eating that object, right? So these are three different words that one uses, right? Hareini, I am, right? I'm changing my status. That works to become a nazir, right? Alai means I'm taking the responsibility to do X, right? To bring something as a korban. And hemenu, I'm distancing myself from it. So those are very particular words that will connote different types of vows. Again, the Gemara says it's better not to take a vow. This is going to be, again, the theme in this Masechet, right? Is it good to do it or is it not good to do it? So here it says it's better not to take a vow. But if you do, then you're not allowed to delay paying it, right? We have this concept of, in Hebrew, it's bal ta'acher, lest you delay, right? Once you are obligated to do something, you are not allowed to delay it. So the Gemara says here, again, right? If you take a vow, fine, right? You shouldn't have, but if you did, don't delay in fulfilling whatever vow you took upon yourself. Here, the Gemara wants to ask, maybe there's a differentiation between, again, neder and nedava, right? The two types of vow. And the Gemara says, no, in both of those situations, you're not allowed to delay it. And the Gemara teaches that Hillel Hazaken, right? Hillel, the elder, in his days, right? No one would ever transgress the prohibition of mi'ilah. Mi'ilah is stealing from something that is sanctified, right? In essence, it's stealing from God, right? So no one did mi'ilah. How come? Because what would they do when they would make something a korban, right? Let's say you have an animal, right? You have this sheep and you want to bring it as a korban. So one way you could do it is sanctify the sheep in your house, and then you walk with it, right, 2 days to get to the temple, and then when you get to the temple, you sacrifice it. What's the problem? Let's say the sheep, right? We've seen this in Seder Moed, right? What if the sheep gets lost? Oh no, right? Again, depending on how I took upon myself to bring this sacrifice, either the animal is already sanctified and now someone's going to see it and maybe use it, or I have a responsibility to bring a korban and now I can't because I could bring another sheep, but that one got lost. So what did Hillel HaZaken do? He said, don't sanctify the sheep in your house. Bring the sheep with you to Jerusalem. When you get to the temple, now you sanctify it, and that will solve all the problems, right? Because it's not sanctified till you get there. And here, the Gemara tells another story of the time of Shimon HaTzadik, that he never ate from the korban, from the sacrifice of a Nazir, who became tameh, right? It seems who became impure, meaning in his time, either they never became impure, or he refused to eat from the sacrifice of an impure Nazir. Again, I think I mentioned this last time. A Nazir, when a person takes upon themselves to be a Nazir, they are not allowed to become impure by a dead body. They have to be extremely careful. And if by accident or on purpose, right, they get they become impure, they actually have to bring, there's a whole ceremony. They bring a sacrifice, and they start their count again. They start the time again that they will, that they are a Nazir, right? Except for this one person who did become Tameh. What was this person? Now there's a story, and it seems very similar to Narcissus, those of you who are familiar with Greek mythology. So there's a story of a very handsome man who, saw his reflection in the mirror, or, in the water, or wherever he saw his reflection, and he was so enamored with himself that he realized he was becoming very haughty. So he decided, what is the way to teach myself humility? I'm going to become a Nazir. So he becomes a Nazir. And why did he do it? Right? I guess he had very long, very beautiful hair, because remember, as I mentioned, at the end of the Nazirut, you need to shave your head. So he was like, oh, I'll become a Nazir, so I'll have to shave my head. The Gemara says, right, this is a good reason to become a Nazir, because you're trying to work on your own character traits. You shouldn't, however, the Gemara adds, I don't want to say in parentheses, but the Gemara says, right, you shouldn't become a Nazir because you get mad at someone or something, right? I am so mad at this person, I'm going to become a Nazir, right? That's not a good reason. But to teach yourself humility is a good reason to become a Nazir. Okay, people, now let's go back to vows, right? People who regret, another reason to become a Nazir, right? People who regret the misdeeds that they made, sometimes they would take upon themselves to become a Nazir, right? So again, they're working, as we mentioned, right? One was a character trait, one was maybe actions, but that is a good way, a reason to become a Nazir. And then what happens? Let's say they become impure, and then they say, oh, I can't believe I now messed myself up, right? I wanted to be a Nazir and I messed it up. I can't believe I became a Nazir, right? And then they regret that they took upon themselves to become a Nazir. And then, right, again, they end up revoking their own vow. And then when they bring their korban, it seems that they've revoked the obligation to bring the vow, and this sacrifice is, to say the least, very complicated, which is why, right, Shimon HaTzadik didn't want to eat from this type of korban, because he was concerned that really it wasn't a valid korban, because they would revoke, right, they would be so upset that they became impure that they would regret the fact that they were a Nazir in the first place. However, right, again, a regular Nazir won't regret his vow at the end of that he's a Nazir, because again, if you take upon yourself to be a Nazir for 30 days, you complete the 30 days. There's no remorse, because you did exactly what you wanted to do, and therefore he would eat from that type of korban at the end of that ceremony, but not the other. Okay, Daf 10. Again, here the Gemara says, right, it's good for a person to take on a nidava, again, a vow, and to fulfill it, but not a neder. Why? So the Gemara says, right, if you take on the fact of korban and nidava, that you're going to bring a sacrifice, right? You can bring it, as we mentioned before. How do we make sure you do it properly? You bring it to the temple, then you sanctify it, and then you can sacrifice it, right? And therefore, won't transgress in any way. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda holds that it is pious to take upon oneself a nidava, a vow of nizirut, right? Again, back and forth, right? Is this a good thing or not? It's interesting, right? We mentioned this previously, that at the end of the Nazir time period, the person needs to bring a korban chatat, right? A sin offering, right? So the Gemara says that, again, Rabbi Yehuda holds that this is good because you're bringing a sin offering for not really sinning. So it seems that it's like win-win. Or Rabbi Shimon says, no, right? If you want to bring a sacrifice, so then just vow to bring a sacrifice. Why are you going through this whole process of being a Nazir, right? He says, make a vow that you want to bring an olah, right? A burnt offering or a shlamim, right? But don't become a Nazir because, again, according to Rabbi Shimon, they're called sinners, right? If you're bringing a sin offering, it must be that you sinned somehow. So it's not a good idea to take upon yourself to become a Nazir, lest you be called a sinner, right? Again, so one question is, why is he a sinner? One reason is because he doesn't drink wine. And we know that part of Judaism is to partake in wine, and therefore that would be a problem. Again, right, all the more so if someone who the Gemara says, right, you shouldn't take on a fast for no reason, right? You shouldn't refrain from, let's say, eating meat or drinking wine for no reason. If there is a reason, right? If there's a fast day, if you're doing it because you want to repent, so then that's a good reason. That's okay. But just in general, it's not a good thing to do. Okay, the next Mishnah tells us, in order to make something a korban, right, to sanctify something, you can say different words that sound like the word korban, right? So there's konam, konach, konas, right? So again, these are, as we used the phrase last week, kinuyim. These are parallel terms. A kinui is a parallel term to the original word, right? So the word is korban, and you say konam. So it sounds like a korban, so we assume that's what you wanted to do. And the Gemara goes through all of the things, right? If you want to make a cherem neder, right? Again, it's another type of sanctifying an object. So you can say, instead of cherem, you can say charak, charach, charatz, charaf, right? Again, words that sound like the word cherem. Now, the Gemara is going to ask, is it these particular words? And the rabbis decided these words are okay, but other words are not okay, or not necessarily, right? So that's what we're going to discuss. Again, Nazir, you can say Nazik, Naziach, Pazir, sounds like Nazir, or for a Shvu'ah, for an oath, you can say Shvuta, Shakuka, right? Neder bimohi, and the Gemara is going to explain that one. Okay, so now the Gemara says, again, as we mentioned, a kinui, that's this term. It's a machloket if it's the word just in another language, right? Is it a foreign language maybe? Or did the sages make these particular terms, kind of nicknames for the original term? And why would they do this? So that people won't accidentally say God's name in vain. Remember, as I mentioned in the beginning, we want to make sure people do not take God's name in vain. So we don't want them to say, right? The Torah says, Korban leHashem, right? We don't say leHashem Korban. Why? Because I'm scared that if you said leHashem, you know what? No, never mind. I don't want to make it a korban, right? So now I took God's name. Again, I didn't say God's real name, but if I would say God's real name, I would have taken his name in vain because I didn't do anything with that statement. But if you say korban leHashem, right? If Hashem comes at the end, we're sure this is what you want to do. So then that would be okay. Okay. So we talked about kinuyim. What happens, and now it gets a little bit more complicated, what if I have a kinuyim? What does that mean? I make up a nickname for the nickname, right? So I had the word konam, and now I say shmonam, right? Oh, it sounds like konam, which sounds like korban, so like maybe that's okay. Right? So that there's a machloket, Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, right? If these are valid or not. So the Gemara tells us that everyone agrees that kinuyim are like foreign language terms. But again, a derivative of a derivative is maybe too far, right? So the Gemara gives examples of these kinuye, kinuyim, words, again, that sound similar, like I just said, right? They sound similar to the word that sounded similar to the actual word, right? And then the question is, are we going too far? Right? If the word doesn't sound like the original word at all, so then it's completely invalid. Okay, next Mishnah at the bottom of 10. If you associate, right? Let's say I have two items in front of me and I associate the permitted item with a forbidden item. So then the permitted item becomes forbidden, right? What does that mean? I say, this loaf of bread should be to me like it's not kosher. It is kosher, but I want it to be like it's not kosher, right? Or I want it to be like a korban. I can't eat a korban, so too I can't eat this piece of bread. So the Gemara goes through different things, right? Like a korban, like not kosher, as if it's impure, if it's pigul or notar, right? These are terms that we used for sacrifice, that something went wrong in the sacrificial process, or it was like notar means left over, and those are forbidden to eat. So all these things are forbidden. So if you take your loaf of bread, which you bought at the supermarket or you just made, and you compare it to these items, it's forbidden. You can't eat it anymore, right? That was your intention. If you associated an object with things in the Beit HaMikdash, okay, so again, that does work also, right? This should be like the trees that were burnt on the altar. This should be like the altar. This should be like Jerusalem. Jerusalem is going to be a machloket if that works. So then all of these things, except for Jerusalem, which is a machloket, all of these things makes it like a korban, and again, becomes forbidden. Okay, so now the Gemara on Daf 11 explains this. Rabbi Meir says that, okay, so, all right, if you make a conditional, okay, so sorry, take a step back. If you make a conditional statement in Hebrew, that's called a t'nai. A t'nai is a stipulation. If X, then Y. Okay, so if you make that conditional statement, it must be like the original conditional statement that we have in the Torah. Where do we have this? With Reuven and Gad. If you remember the two tribes that want to stay on the other side, right, on the Transjordan, they want to stay on the other side, they make a stipulation with Moshe. They say, right, we will come, right, and conquer the lands with our brethren, and then we'll come back. And if we don't do it, so then we will not get this land, right? So they did what's called a double condition, a double t'nai, basically, right? In Hebrew, it's called t'nai kaful, double, meaning you need to say, if I do X, then Y, and if I don't do X, then Z, right? Meaning positive and negative. If you only say the positive side or the negative side, so then it doesn't work, right? You have to give a double t'nai. Okay, so now go back to our thing, our Mishnah. So the Gemara says that our Mishnah is entirely like Rabbi Yehuda, and there's a dispute about Jerusalem because, again, what does it mean it's like Jerusalem? Does that make something prohibited, or does it make it, okay, right, you haven't done anything. Okay, what if you say lechulin? Okay, this should be like chulin. Now, chulin is regular food. So if I say lechulin, the Gemara says, what did I really mean to say? Lo chulin. This is not chulin. If it's not chulin, it's prohibited. And now I have successfully made my, let's say, loaf of bread asur to eat, right? Prohibited to eat, right? So lechulin doesn't mean to chulin. I want to make it permitted. I'm saying not chulin, and now I make it prohibited. Okay, another one. What if I say, now, follow me, lechulin, which was not chulin, but now lechulin lo ochal lecha. So I say it's going to be not chulin, and I'm not going to eat it. So now, those of you following, I just used a double negative. So if I use a double negative, that makes a positive. So that doesn't work, meaning I have not done anything to this loaf of bread, because I basically said it's going to be prohibited so that I cannot eat it. So now you can eat it because I was a double negative. Okay. Or maybe that's not what I was saying. Maybe I was saying I want it to be lo chulin, right? Lichulin, not chulin. Therefore, I can't eat it, right? Then it becomes not a double negative, just one negative, and then it becomes prohibited to eat. I hope that wasn't too complicated. A little bit more complication, right? What if I say le chulin, right, with a shva underneath? Le chulin, that means like chulin. That means I can eat it. What if I said la chulin? La means low, right? La is short for low. Lo chulin, not permitted to eat, therefore prohibited. So then it becomes prohibited. Okay, so yeah, that's going to be our masechet. Okay, next, if he says, right, if a person says, it should be like the meat of a shlamim sacrifice. Okay, now the question is, what do I mean, right? Because before you sprinkle the blood, we're going to get into a little korbanot, right? Before you sprinkle the blood, you are not allowed to eat the meat, right? It is prohibited. However, I would say uniquely to shlamim, after you sprinkle the blood, the people, not only the priests, but people can partake of that sacrifice, right? Like an example is the Korban Pesach, right? After you put the blood on the altar, on the mizbeach, you can eat from it. Therefore, when I said that the meat should be like the shlamim, right? Do I mean like right after the sprinkling of the blood, and then it is permitted, or did I mean to make it prohibited? Right? So if you had meat of the shlamim in front of him, and then he had regular food, and he said, this should be like this. So then again, does he mean, and our whole masechet is going to be about this, right? What was the person's intent? Did they intend to say it should be like the shlamim sacrifice before you sprinkled the blood and you tried to make it prohibited? Or, right, so this is called, right, the ikar, right? Are you going back to the original status of this item? Or are you saying the status that it is now? If you can already eat this item, so then I go according to the status that it is now. So the daf 12 tells us that it, again, in our list of things, it also compared it to pigul and notar. So let's just define the two words. Pigul is a sacrifice that while the priest was involved in sacrificing this animal, he had the wrong thought. What does that mean? He was saying, I can't wait to eat this meat in 3 days. He's not allowed to eat the meat in 3 days. Depending on the sacrifice, he has to eat it within 1 day or 2 days. But if he was like, whoa, this looks like really good meat, I'm going to save it till next week's barbecue, that ruins, right? That ruins the sacrifice. It's called pigul, and the meat is asur. It is prohibited to eat that meat. Notar is leftover, right? Again, as I mentioned, every sacrifice has a certain amount of time that we need to eat it by, right? Again, our example was Korban Pesach, right? You need to eat it that night. The next day, you can't eat from the Korban Pesach anymore. It's called notar, and it is now forbidden to eat. Okay, so we just compared the Korban Shlamim to these Pigul and Notar. So let's see what we're trying to say. When one compares a permitted object to a forbidden object, in order to make it asur, right, in order to make it prohibited, right, it must be, that was what our Mishnah was like, right? We said this loaf of bread should be like fill in the blank, something that is prohibited. But here the Gemara explains there's a caveat. What's the caveat? The object that you're trying to compare it to must itself be something that was vowed, meaning I made that original thing prohibited. However, right, like a korban, right? I take the sheep, I say this sheep is now a korban. I now took a very good sheep that could have been for your barbecue, and now I made it forbidden because it's a korban. Now, if I have, right, that meat and a loaf of bread, and I say this loaf of bread should be like that meat, that works, right? This is called hatpasa. I am almost like copy paste, right? I'm trying to imprint the forbiddenness of this item onto this item, right? Now, that only works if the original item was something that became prohibited because of a neder, a vow. However, if you have an object that in and of itself, it is prohibited from the Torah, now I cannot transfer, or again, I can't, it's not really transferring, but I can't now make a permitted item prohibited based on that item. So now the Gemara says, right, when you compare the pigul, the meat, let's say, to pigul or notar, you're really comparing it to the meat of the korban, which is something that I or somebody else made prohibited, right? Again, here, what's the Gemara saying? Notar in and of itself is prohibited from the Torah. Therefore, how could I ever say that this loaf of bread should be like notar, right? That doesn't work because notar is already prohibited from the Torah. Rather, when I say that this loaf of bread should be like notar, what do I mean? I mean like the meat of a sacrifice that, again, when I made it, I could make that sacrifice prohibited because I'm the one who made the sacrifice or brought that sacrifice. That works. But, right, let's say the Gemara now continues. If someone takes a neder not to eat the meat, not to eat meat or wine on the day that his father died, or on the day that his teacher died, or on a fast day, right? Again, these are, some people have this custom of not eating. Like some people actually fast on these days, on their yahrzeit, on the day when they're mourning for their parent. Some people say, I'm not going to eat meat on those days, or when he sees Jerusalem. And then he says, right, on another day, I'm not going to drink wine like that day, right, like that Sunday that was the yahrzeit of my parent who passed away. I don't know if that was clear, but basically, again, a derivative, right? You take upon yourself not to eat wine, not to eat meat or wine on a certain day, and then you take another day and you compare it to that day, right? Does that work or not? The Gemara says that is a valid oath, right? If he says, let this day be like that day, right? Oh, today's Tuesday. I want it to be like last Sunday, right? And then the question is, what happened last Sunday, right? Are you assuming that he's talking about that day that, you know, the day that his father died and that day that he took upon himself that oath? Again, here the Gemara is saying that seems to prove that we go according to the essential state of the source object. Here, the source object is not an object, rather a day, right? I want today to be like last Sunday, right? And if last Sunday I took upon myself a fast, so then I can now on Tuesday take upon myself that fast, right? If I say that I go according to, again, what I originally meant, right? Therefore, if you say that you want the meat to be like a shlamim, right? Again, you meant for it to be prohibited like it was originally when you sanctified that sacrifice, right? Or again, I mentioned the other option is we go according to the current state. If the meat is currently, permitted to eat, So then that doesn't work, and I'm not prohibiting my loaf of bread. Okay, another option. What if I say my food should be like challah, right? Like the Kohen's challah, or like Aaron's truma, again, like the priest's truma. So then that's invalid because I can't eat those things because I can't eat them from the Torah. That wasn't something that someone made them prohibited. Therefore, I can't make my loaf of bread prohibited because it's a different, again, as I mentioned, if I want to make it like something that is prohibited, it has to be something that I could have controlled. These things I couldn't have controlled. Okay, again, right, if I say it should be like the truma of the loaves of a Thanksgiving offering, the lachmei todah. Again, those I do control. I bring those. So then that's valid and your food is prohibited. Again, this proves that we must be talking about the essential state, again, when they were prohibited. And that seems to be a proof, right? What if I say this loaf of bread should be like the Trumat Halishka, right? Trumat Halishka, if you remember back to Shkalim, when everyone gave machatzit hashekel, the half shekel, that became communal funds. We use those funds to buy things. So, right, again, those are, right, we made that money sanctified because we gave it. Therefore, I can sanctify my my vow to sanctify my food when comparing it to this works because, again, these are things that we have control over. Okay, again, since we mentioned the lachmei todah, let's just understand what this is. This is the Thanksgiving offering. We're in the month of Thanksgiving, right? A korban todah is when someone feels that they need to thank God for, right, various things that happen in their lives. So you bring an offering, a sacrifice. Part of the sacrifice was you also made 40 loaves. The Gemara teaches that there are 4 types of loaves. 3 are chametz. 1 is challah, meaning 1 is leavened, the others are unleavened, but you make these 40 loaves of bread. The Kohanim eat some of them, and the rest you need to eat. And what's fascinating about the Korban Todah is they have to be eaten within 1 day. How could one person eat 40 loaves? What is the Torah trying to teach us? That when you bring a Korban Todah, you should not be coming by yourself. You should be making a party, right? So you invite your 40 best friends, everybody gets a loaf of bread, right? And you celebrate, right? What's the point? You don't celebrate in private. You celebrate in public because you're sharing the greatness of God, right? This is what God did for me. So it's actually a beautiful idea that, you know, you can tell the purpose of the sacrifice based on the laws, right? So the fact that you have to eat 40 loaves of bread in 1 day means you can't do this by yourself. So since we're talking about these 40 loaves, what happens if, again, as I mentioned, you were supposed to make 40 loaves and you give 10 of them, you give, I think it's 10 of them to the Kohen and you eat. Is that true? You give some of them to the priest. For some reason I'm not remembering right now. You give to the priest some, and you take the rest. So what happens if instead of making 40 loaves, you made 4 large loaves, right? I don't know, not Guinness Book, but you made 4 large loaves. So now, I see why I thought 10, right? So now the Gemara is teaching us that when you give to the priest, you're not allowed to give slices of bread. That's not appropriate. You need to give a loaf. So if you made 4 loaves instead of 40, you need to give an entire loaf to the Kohen because it's not appropriate to just give a slice of bread. What if the last thing we're going to mention, what if you say that this, again, loaf of bread or whatever, this item that I have should be like the meat of a firstborn animal. again, a firstborn animal is brought as a sacrifice, it's sanctified. So here there's a machloket if that works or not, right? One opinion at the top of 13 tells us it does work because, again, you can. One says that it's mutar, meaning you can eat your food because it does not become prohibited. Why? Because the bechor becomes, right, the firstborn of the animal becomes prohibited. Wait 1 second. Yes, okay, right, because the bechor becomes prohibited from the Torah. And as we mentioned, if you're trying to compare something to something that is prohibited from the Torah, it doesn't work, and therefore you can still eat the bread. Or another option is that it does work, meaning it is forbidden to eat the bread. Why? Because you said, right, le Hashem, right? Part of the bechor is that you say that it's for God, and since you have a hand in it, therefore it's also seen as not only from the Torah, but also a person has control over it. Therefore, that does work. It is a valid oath. So I'm just going to finish up by, it's important to understand in this masechet to keep the words, mutar and asur, right? Prohibited and permitted, sometimes are going to be not what we think, because it could also mean, was my vow effective or not, right? If I'm trying to make something forbidden to me and it's invalid, it doesn't work, so then the vow is ineffective, it's invalid, but the food is permitted because I was trying to make it forbidden and it didn't work. So there's a lot of I would say, I don't use the word complication, but it is quite complicated when we're talking about, does the vow work or not? Is the item prohibited or not? And was it valid or not? So I hope that was clear enough. So I wanted to, first of all, thank you very much, everyone. And next week, we're going to do again Sunday morning. So I apologize for those of you if it doesn't work. But next week, we are going to do again Sunday morning. And the following week, we'll go back to regular schedule. So I'll update you with email. But thank you very much. Have a Shavua Tov. It should be a good week. And see you next week, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.